Good day, everyone. So today you and I are going to talk about exotic programming tools, and yeah, let's just get into it because I have a few things to cover. Basically I need to cover today. You have to kind of excuse me. I'm not in my regular location today, so we'll just have to make do. But let's get into it. So first and foremost, exotic programming tools. How do I define exotic programming tools? Well, I would call exotic programming tools the sort of thing that are not found all that much in regular day application development. And exotic programming tools can be anything from let's call it a graph database to something such as, well, you can even have I would even say that certain concepts such as event sourcing is an exotic programming technique, if you will. It's something that is not all that boilerplate. What I can tell you is to make this more tangible to you, I can tell you that the most common, now just stop me if you recognize any of this, or rather if you don't agree, or post a comment or something about it. But I will make a bold statement. I will say that if you are a web developer, or you're working towards the web, odds are that you will use the following approach to solving almost every single problem that you face. First and foremost, you will have a relational database of some sort. You will have a web server of some sort, usually in one of the, it doesn't really matter which language. You will have an MVC structure to said system. You will use session authentication in order to validate your users. You will have a front end that is either basically a web client, an Android phone or an iOS phone or something like that, but let's just stick to web for right now, which means that you're going to have a front end that is either completely server-side rendered, or it's going to be partially server-side rendered with a few SBA web pages there with JavaScript and all that good stuff, or you will be super trendy, or you're going to think that you're super trendy by using an all JavaScript framework. This is what I will define as the regular stuff. This is the backbone of almost every single thing that you will ever build. These things that I just mentioned, they are basically bread and butter. They are so common, in fact, they're like Volvos. They're the safest, most established damn thing around. And exotic programming tools are the sort of thing that comes around every once in a while and wows you. Now, what I'm here to tell you is that as a developer, you may not think this today, depending on where you are in your career. You might just be starting out, and all things programming are really, really fancy and interesting, and it's just awesome to be able to produce code that can be used to make applications. And I know that feeling all too well. But you will trust me, you will most likely arrive at a point where you get bored by building the application that I just described to you. You have no idea how many times I've built that application or something of that flavor. It is in fact so common to build things with that exact approach that I can only say that it's the most common thing that I find. There are absolutely deviations to what I just said, but that's the general backbone. Most web applications are built that way. Now, why is that relevant to exotic web programming, or rather exotic tools? Well, it's not, actually. It has nothing. What I just stated, this is... There's nothing exotic about it, but the way I think that what's interesting is how this ties in and affects where all these more exotic solutions are coming from. And I think that one thing, at least that I've noticed with myself, is that, and I've seen it in other programmers as well, I have seen so many extremely talented programmers kind of go, well, I would really like to try out this other thing. Because imagine it from our perspective, as a business grows, the business usually only wants tools that will allow them to produce that user value that they make money from. But as an engineer, If you build the same thing 100 times, you're going to get bored, and you're going to want to have go at something more fancy. You want to challenge yourself. Think of it as having a great artist, a painter, paint a house. That's the way that you will feel. Or imagine being a designer. You're passionate about design, and you go into, say, the automotive industry, and then you get your first job as a designer, and you're forced to design a belt buckle or a gear stick. I've seen the worst thing I can't even express in words how horrible that I felt when I saw a documentary about Intel and their microprocessors and how they are actually made. And I saw the different stations in their factories and how these electrical engineers, these mechanical or these engineers who have studied for so many years, and they most likely have masters in things I can't even pronounce, they spend their entire life working so that they can literally do something that is a little bit more glorified than standing in a factory watching a machine. There was one thing that really stuck with me. There was a woman who had been, she had most likely studied for years and years and years. Her entire job was to make sure that the automated computer system was actually soldering the microchips in the correct manner. That's her entire job. She overwatches the automated system. It's basically, in my opinion, the education requirements are vastly different. But from somebody like me who's just looking from the outside in, it looks to me that she has virtually the same type of job that you would find in, say, a car factory, with people who simply put on tires to the body of the car. Now, this is not bad. I'm not saying maybe she's loving what she's doing, but what I can tell you from experience is that there are a lot of engineers out there who get bored with building the same thing over and over. And that's where these more exotic tools come from. Or rather, I think that what happens, and this is where I see people go wrong. What I see happen is that you see all these shiny tools. My vice that I fell for was graph databases at one point. I thought they were so sexy, and I really wanted to use graph databases. So I kind of convinced myself that I needed a graph database for a project I was working on. I added it in, and it made the entire project much more, I had more fun, but it didn't bring much value to the project. And I can only tell you that this is the way that you most likely are going to spend your career. Odds are that most of the companies out there are going to hire you to build the same thing in a different flavor. Now, this is not boring necessarily, but it's not going to be as exciting as using some of the more exotic and fancy tools. And that is a good thing and a bad thing. And the bad thing about it is that it might dull your passions a little bit as a programmer, because I think that this is kind of a little bit of a sickness, because I find it very hilarious how almost every single company I ever talk to have as almost a hard requirement that their developers are passionate people, and then they force them to make bricks out of clay. I mean, how honestly, employers of the world, what the fuck? You say you want passionate developers, or rather you're hiring amazing artists, and you force them to paint houses. Do you see the kind of the issue here? I'm sorry. It's just insane. To me, it is insane to have a requirement that everybody should be super passionate about their job and live for their craft, and then be happy that you're forcing them to build the same damn thing they built 100 times. Anyway, enough about that ranting. What I want to tie on into here is that although I resent this idea that you need passionate developers in your company, but you still force them to build the same thing, I resent that that's the mentality. I also argue that you can't go too far in the other direction. I see a lot, as I tried to say earlier, I've seen developers who have convinced themselves that they need a fancy exotic tool to solve a job that is, honestly, they don't need it. They just convince themselves because they're bored. And what I want you to take away from this little video of mine is that it's much more efficient for you. It's better for you to try, and instead of convincing yourself that an exotic tool is right for your most likely boilerplate project, you have to really ask yourself this fundamental question. What is the tool designed to be good at? What problem does it solve for you? Because the issue comes when you want to use the tool for a problem. And that's the reverse order. What has to happen in order for it to be a good solution or be something that is truly useful to your project? Because I'm not saying that exotic tools are bad. You just need to be very specific. You just need to really know when it's a good idea. And I argue that if you realize what problem that the tool is solving for you, then you can ask yourself, do I have that problem? Because if you have the problem, then the tool makes sense, but not the other way around. You have to be honest with yourself. Are you really using this because you really need it, or are you using it because you want to use it? And I find most often that especially developers who use very fancy tools and where they talk about, they're using all the trendiest, most exotic things, they actually do just convince themselves that they need this, but they don't. And then there are situations where it makes a lot of sense, where you can go the wrong way, where a conservative who thinks that you should throw, they have if you only have a hammer, you use it to solve every problem. A good example of that is for graph databases, for example. If you have a very dependency or a relationship type of problem, a graph type of, or rather, let's take a social media platform. Now, if you try to map a social media with all the different friends and the different relationship statuses and so forth in a relational database, that is going to be really, really inefficient. Even though a relational database is amazing for almost every single problem, it is really crappy for that specific sort of problem. And that's where graph databases actually can help you out. So what I want you to remember is that exotic tools should be the exception to the rule. They shouldn't be what you reach for to begin with. You need to really ask yourself if you need them, because odds are that you are going to create a lot of unnecessary complexity and cause damage to the project if you indulge your need to challenge yourself as an engineer. Because I hate to say that, I'm sorry guys, but it's not about you. It's about the project. It's about the project getting to where it needs to be. And if that is painful, you should do what I have been doing. I stopped trying to push a company who wants to who doesn't need something that I want to work with. I stopped trying to push those ideas, and I started looking for a company that actually has the sort of problem that I get excited about working. I get excited about working with. It's just my 2 cents on the matter. You can take it or leave it, but I think it makes a lot of sense for you to start being the sort of person who focuses more on the quality of their work rather than their own personal enjoyment. You should absolutely indulge yourself, but you should never risk your clients or your companies or your project's health so that you can play around with the fancy tool. There are better ways for you to do that than deluding yourself into believing something that simply is not true. And that's how you get to be a real professional. I hope you found this useful. Have a great day.